morning. My name is Jen Beeker, and I'm with Crestwood, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. A couple housekeeping items to go through before we begin. The webinar today, if you do have questions, we will make sure we have time at the end to try to answer all those. However, during the presentation, feel free to type them into your questions area in the GoToWebinar tool pane, and that way we make sure that we'll cover those. Also, once the webinar is over, there'll be a short survey that pops up on your screen, and if you wouldn't mind taking just a minute to fill out those few questions for us, I would greatly appreciate it. Today's webinar topic, we have CV Sudarshan from Gorilla Expense. He's the product manager, and he's going to give us a live demonstration of the Gorilla Expense tool, how it works with time and expense tracking for Dynamics GP. Again, thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you, CV, for doing today's presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Jen, for the warm introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening to some attendees, and welcome to today's webinar on taking the hassle out of time and expense tracking for Dynamics GP. We have a really good presentation lined up, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to look at this with us. So what we'll do today is I'll just give you a brief overview about us, our history, and our goals and missions in terms of fixing this process for companies. And then we'll talk about some of the pain points with the manual expense reporting process. We'll touch upon the why now, and the how when it comes to automating T&E and time capture, and why now is a really good time to do it. And then we'll spend the majority of the time focusing on the application demo. We'll touch the different pieces. We'll look at the mobile app to capture expenses using the mobile device. We'll kind of rinse and repeat that process on the web. And then, of course, the integration into GP so that you can see the data, how it moves from one end to the other end. And like Jen mentioned, there'll be time at the end for Q&A, so please, as you go through this demo, as you have any questions, please type them in the questions box. So with that, just to give you a brief overview about us, expense reporting and time capture and P-card reconciliation, basically complete spend management for companies, really runs through our blood. We're very experienced in this space. Our team itself comes from backgrounds with other larger expense reporting systems, so we really understand what works and what doesn't work within this space. So we've incorporated that into our solution to make it much simpler, much easier to use, yet powerful enough to get the job done. Our mission is to become the de facto spend management solution for Dynamics ERP that provides robust and panoramic visibility to the stakeholders in a company, right? Your CFOs, your controllers, your accounting managers, your department managers, and of course even travelers. They want to know what's going on with expenses, what's going on with time captured for projects, or if you have a purchasing card, how do you reconcile those expenses? So these are the three different product areas that we have. And the way we capture that information, make it available, makes it a very intuitive and a very powerful solution. And that caught the attention of Microsoft a few years ago when they sponsored our solution, and they asked us to show how we were innovating in the space at the demo conference in San Francisco. So it was pretty good to get recognition and validation from the mothership. A little intimidating, but definitely exciting. So that's been our journey so far. And we've really pushed the technology so that customers can derive maximum benefits. This is still an age-old problem. The manual processes that companies use, that's really not being solved, and it really requires to be solved because the efficiencies are huge. Let's talk about some of these pain points, and I've captured some of the key points that we have solved for our customers. And you could probably relate to some, if not all of these. And I jestfully refer to this as the Excel and Scotch tape pain points, which is today's processes that companies use for expenses and timesheet is manual, which is time-consuming. It's just too much of a hassle, especially with travelers on the road all the time, managers who are not able to review expenses on time, and of course accounting, there's missing information or there's delays in submitting expenses, which is just frustrating. Missing receipts, missing data is a constant theme, right? There's only so many receipts you can put into your back pocket before they start disappearing. Many companies are increasingly taking an intelligent view to corporate spend, so they have policies that they want to set up to monitor how that spend happens. Maybe it's tied to a project, maybe it's just general spend, but they want to have good visibility into what's going on. And there's only so much you can do in Excel in setting up policies and being able to monitor that and audit expense reports. So this is another theme that's becoming more and more prevalent and more important for companies so they can get a better handle on policies. This is another favorite we've seen with many of our customers, which is having to key in the data into GP and other systems manually every single time. The more number of pages that you have, the more amount of work is. So if you use a third-party payroll system, you have to key in the data into the payroll system as well. It's just inefficient. Paper-based, companies are looking to move away from a paper-based system, get rid of all those shelves and all those cabinets, keep everything digital. And finally, what we've seen is expense reporting can become an emotive subject with employees, especially with word warriors, right? And I have this one example, one customer story that I typically share on these webinars is one of our customers has a salesperson who was on the road all the time. He was doing a great job in closing deals for customers, but he had close to $60,000 or $70,000 in corporate card spend that were not reconciled, because he just didn't have time. He didn't have the tools to get the job done on time. So that led to a pretty contentious situation between the CFO and the VP of sales, because on one hand, this employee was doing a fantastic job. On the other hand, he was just behind on expenses. So it just leads to a very tricky situation, because mostly travelers don't have the tools to get their job done on time, which of course is very important to the finance organization, from closing the books and timely management of expenses and so on. So as you can see, there's plenty of efficiencies, plenty of improvements. You can cut costs, and you can improve productivity for all of your employees by automating this process. Which leads us to the next piece of it. Why do it? Why now? And how do you go about doing it? So let's tackle the first part of it, which is why automate T&E. And I have this quote from our friends at CFO.com. What they did is they surveyed, I think, about 200 CFOs on automating T&E and what they thought about travel expenses, especially from a couple of years back when everybody predicted that travel is going to go away, which is really not happening. It's only going up. And what these CFOs said is T&E expenses were second only to payroll in terms of the area of spend or discretionary spend in a corporate budget. And as costs continue to climb, more and more CFOs, more and more controllers were paying more attention towards getting a better handle on this spend. And the best part is, if it is managed well, it can be controlled. So if you have a good process, if you have a good system, a good application that helps you track and manage these expenses, you can control it. That leads to reduction in costs. That leads to better visibility. If you track expenses by projects, which you bill back to your clients, that just leads to a much better handling of project management and project accounting, which is important for many companies. Following this, why do this now, right? Well, because we're sitting at the nexus and the convergence of several new technologies that make our lives much easier, right? We're here, the 21st century, and the first part of that is the mobile revolution. We're right in the middle of it. Salespeople today travel on the road. They send emails from their mobile device. They obviously call customers from their mobile device. They access the CRM systems from their mobile device. They should be able to do their expenses on the mobile device as well, right? It's just that prevalent and that easy. You combine that with the whole cloud concept, which is being able to access tools, data at your fingertips, anywhere, anytime, through a browser or through an app, and that's really powerful. You combine that with the software as a service or a subscription business model where customers can just pay as they go. It makes it very attractive, very economical to own as well. Flip a switch, the service is on. You flip the switch the other way, the service is off. You don't have to, you don't have to worry about the classic capital expenditure debate that people have had with CFOs in the past. And finally, you combine that with integration to multiple systems. Today's traveler is not just challenged by the amount of data, but also by the different sources of data, right? You've got expenses with receipts in front of you. You've got credit card expenses. you've got a receipt sitting in your inbox, and then from an accounting and AP standpoint, they have to send that expense data to the accounting system, maybe a payroll system. Maybe it needs to also go to the CRM system to reconcile against a customer name. There's corporate card integration, corporate card data that needs to come in. So there's just too many moving pieces. And all of these technologies now have connectors and APIs that talk to each other, making it a very seamless and integrated solution for customers. So bottom line is the timing could not be better to automate expense reporting, time capture, and so on. Sounds interesting, right? So you're probably thinking, okay, these points make sense. How do I go about it? What is the first step that I take? Because there's a lot to think about. Well, that's where our solution comes in, and we have a very seamless, a very integrated format of bringing all this data together in one place for customers to manage. It's easy enough for the travelers to use, yet powerful enough for somebody in accounting or AP to manage that data and send it to the right places. So I have a solution diagram that I'm showing on this slide, which shows the best way to automate T&E. And within the dotted line is our expense solution itself. And I'll just walk through the different pieces and how they work. I'll work my way from one corner to another. So I'll start at the top left. Obviously we have a web application which is accessible on a browser, on a laptop, or a computer, and we support all the 4 major browsers. So travelers can create expenses, they can submit expense reports from the browser, managers can approve, admins and accounting can query expenses and things like that. And then we have a mobile app. We support iPhone, iPad, Android phone, and we have a planned release for a BlackBerry app and also a Windows phone app. Surprisingly, believe it or not, the BlackBerry is coming back. So that's coming up too. But the mobile app makes it very easy to capture expenses with receipts when they're in front of you. We integrate with several corporate credit cards. 3 major service providers. I've got their logos down here, and we can import their statements into the application and make the respective transactions available to the respective travelers for them to incorporate into an expense report. And fourthly, we have an email feature, which is a new feature we launched last year. We call it the forward and forget feature. So if you have an email in your inbox that has a receipt, a PDF receipt supplied or attached to the email by the merchant, then you can simply forward that email to a fixed Gorilla Expense mailbox for the application to create the transaction for you. Whatever PDF attachment was in the email will be thrown into the receipt box within our application. And this solves the point that I made earlier, which is being challenged by different sources of data, right? You have expenses that are coming in from different places. And we'll see how this feature works when we look at the demo. What we do further is we take those email transactions and the corporate card expenses and make that conveniently available on the mobile device. So essentially our mobile app is a complete your expenses and expense reports without getting in front of a computer kind of app. The traveler still has the option of completing expenses on the web if they want to, if they prefer. It's really up to the user's preference. Built into the web application are alerts, approvals. You can have multiple levels of manager approvals. The routing of expenses, expense data is all electronic. You can also set up policies. There's different levels of policies you can set up. There's also an analytics and reporting module where you can query expenses. If you're a manager, you can query your employees' expenses and expense reports. And you can run a list of canned reports for visibility and for slicing and dicing the data and things like that. For some of our pharmaceutical, medical device, and biotech customers, we also have a Sunshine Act module where you can tag expenses with NPI numbers. This is required per the Affordable Care Act. It's actually now called the Open Payment Act instead of the Sunshine Act, but it's an important federal requirement, and we can tag expenses with NPI numbers of doctors. Going outside of the dotted box, we also can integrate with third-party systems like travel booking systems or payroll systems. In the case of travel booking systems, as you can imagine, the data flow is from outside into our box, where we'll import travel booking data and then make that available to the respective travelers. For a payroll system, the data flow is going out of our dotted box, out to the payroll system. Like ADP, if you're using ADP to issue reimbursements to employees, we'll generate a file that you can import into ADP for it to kick off reimbursements just like it would, with the payroll cycle. Finally, once all the expense and the time data has been assembled, approved, then using our proprietary integration app, we can send the expense data to GP with the click of a button. And again, we'll see that during the demo today. So now that you have an overview of all the different moving pieces and all the different options, let's focus on the demo of the product itself. I've broken it up into two pieces. First, we'll look at the expense piece because that's a little bit more comprehensive. We'll look at the mobile app for capturing expenses using a mobile device. We'll kind of rinse and repeat that process on the web so you get a feel for usability. And then once we have an expense report, we'll send that to GP through our integration tool. And I'm using GP 2013 in this case. Following that, I'll show you our web-based timesheet application as well that's built in to the expense module. So let's start with the mobile side of things. Like I mentioned, there's a couple of options on the mobile app. You can complete your entire expense report from the mobile app, or you can upload line item expenses from the mobile app and then incorporate them into a report on the web. So let's start with the first half, which is completing an entire expense report from the mobile device, where we will log into the mobile app, we'll create a couple of expenses, we'll attach a few corporate card expenses, and then I've got an email transaction also sitting in the mobile app to throw into an expense report on the device. So I'm going to segue from my PowerPoint. Let me just pull up my mobile app live. Okay. So you're looking at my iPhone live, and I'll just pause here for a second in case you're not able to see my screen. Please let us know in the chat box or in the questions box.
I can see it okay. It's Jen.
Okay, perfect. So I've logged into Gorilla Expense Pro, which is our mobile app. There are 4 buttons on the home page. There's a reports button where you would create expense reports. There's an expenses button where you're going to see your line item expenses. There's a settings button which has a download master where your merchant information, state, expense type, currency, details like that, which are mapped from our application. The admin account can be updated. So if you add a new merchant or if you add a new expense type, the traveler can come in here and update these fields. They can go to the bottom and say download all to update all the fields. There is a user profile field where you can set defaults for some of the fields that you know might not change frequently. So if you're going on a trip to New York for a week, then obviously the currency is going to be US dollars, state's going to be New York, city is going to be New York. So you can pick those values here, and when you create a transaction on the device, those values will be pre-filled in the respective fields. So that expedites the expense creation process. And the reason we created this screen is it's kind of an interim solution. We had an OCR feature at one point, optical character recognition, where you could take a picture of a receipt and the app will automatically extract the data. But we've pulled it back because we're releasing an advanced version of OCR where we're going to apply some intelligence to that OCR feature. So that's coming up pretty soon. I think it's supposed to be early this quarter where we'll have an OCR feature available on the mobile app. So in the meantime, we have this default functionality to expedite the expense creation process. So I've got some default values set here. I can always change these values from within the transaction if I need to. They're not set in stone. So let's go back to the home page. I'll go to the expenses screen. And you'll notice there are 3 options at the bottom. And if you remember, those are the 3 boxes in the solution diagram that I showed you. Mobile, then there's bank, and then there's email. And you can just switch between them by clicking on them. Since I'm on the email tab already, I'll start here. So a few minutes before this webinar, I forwarded an email to receipts@gorillaexpense.com. I threw in a PDF, example PDF receipt. And in the subject line of that email, I typed hotel internet fees or something like that. So let's open up this transaction, and you'll notice that there's a PDF receipt attached. That's the receipt that I attached to the email before I clicked on send. And then there are some of the fields are empty, like the expense type, which is the first one. The amount is $40. In the body of the email, you can use keywords to complete this transaction. So I put total space 40. So took that amount 40 and put that in the amount field. The payment method is cash because it's just out-of-pocket expense. And when we look at the mobile tab, I'll give you a full view of these different options within these fields. And the country, state, city, they're all defaulted. And the comments, you can see it says internet fees at hotel. That's what I put in the subject line of the email. So the fact that you see a yellow triangle means that this transaction is not complete. So I'll go back to the previous page. I'll click on edit. I'll open it up. And I'll pick the expense type here. And there's a list of expense types available in the application. These are, of course, demo expense types just for this demo account. You can name the expense types as you like, and you can set up multiple expense types. We have a role or work group concept where, let's say you have 500 GL codes and your salesperson only uses 5 of those frequently, like airfare, parking, meals, and so on. Then we can define a sales role and associate just 5 of those expense types to those roles, so the salesperson will only see 5 in this list. They won't see the entire list of 500. Each of these expense types has the base 4-digit account code tied in the back end. So like airfare probably has like 6520 as the account code, which is what GP needs to see, and we'll use that as one of the segments to form the entire distribution. So in this case, I'll pick hotel as the expense type. I'll leave the date as is. I can change it if I want to. I can change the amount as well if I want to. I'll jump down. For our Canadian and European customers, we have a GST or VAT capture as well. There are 4 sub-amount fields we can enable that will show up here. I'm using 2 of those, one for GST, VAT, and then the other one for tips. So if you want to break up tips separately, you can do that. And some of our customers do that, and they'll have tips go to a separate GL code altogether, and we can map it. So just coming down further, in the merchant field, I'll just pick a merchant, and once you start typing, it'll give you the name of a merchant. This is a canned list of merchants we make available. If the traveler is unable to find a name in here, then they can be pretty creative. They can use other, or they can say NA, or they can click on the plus button at the top right to add the name of a new merchant. If they add a new name, it'll be saved, it'll be available for future use, and it'll be available to other users using the application as well. The other side of that equation, we can also disable that plus button that you see, because sometimes you'll see 5 different spellings of Starbucks, right? Because everybody's adding it. So really comes down to your preference, and that's one of the strong points with our application is we can really be flexible and configure it to your requirements instead of the other way, which the customer having to conform to an application's requirements. So I'll just pick, let's see, I'll just pick Hilton or Hampton as an example hotel type. I'll leave the payment method as cash. I'll leave everything else as is. Click on Save. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this expense by clicking on the Upload All button. So we have one expense that's been uploaded. The red circle turned green, which is a successful upload. I'll jump to the next tab, which is Bank. And if I refresh this page, it'll show me if there are any corporate card expenses pending. And there actually are some already. Those are the 3 red circles that you see. So again, a few minutes before this webinar, I refreshed this page, and 3 of these transactions dropped in from our corporate card. The one at the bottom with the green circle was already successfully uploaded and attached to a report and sent. So let's open one of these red circle expenses. I'll try something different. I'll try the fees, the first one. So based on the corporate card statement and the format, the transaction typically will show up as complete to the traveler. So the expense type will be pre-filled. We can also create a bank mapping feature. It's based on a bank mapping algorithm that we have, but based on the keywords provided by the credit card company, our application will automatically select a pertinent expense type. So it looked at this transaction, the keywords in the transaction supplied by the credit card company said AA miscellaneous sales tax Los Angeles. So it's American Airlines, it's a baggage fee expense, and in our demo account that has been mapped to say anytime you see something like that, pick fees as the expense type, and if you see AA, pick American Airlines as a merchant, which is what it did. You can see the merchant field is filled with American Airlines, and the expense type is fees, and the payment method is automatically Amex, which is our corporate card. So from the traveler standpoint, it's complete. Literally the only thing missing here is a receipt, right? So for that, I'll go back to the bank tab, I'll click on edit, I'll open up that expense, click on add photo. I have three options. I can attach an image from the photo gallery of the device, I can use the camera to take a picture of a receipt in front of me, or I can also pull a PDF receipt from my Dropbox account. And we have that feature because some phones make it difficult to attach a multi-page PDF receipt, so if you just throw in your Dropbox account, you can pull it in from there. I'll pick photo gallery in this case, and I'll just pick an example receipt that I have in here. I'll say receipt, click on save, and then I'm going to open that up again, click on upload, and we have a corporate card expense done. So you see how easy it was to do a corporate card expense. So you would follow the same process for the other two, just attach a receipt and upload it. Let's jump to the final tab, which is mobile. I don't have any expenses right here, but let's create one from scratch. I'll click on create expense. I'll pick the camera this time, and I have a receipt in front of me. Let's take a picture of that receipt. I'll say use photo, and this is where you'll see the OCR button or option available in the next version, the updated version, where you click on that and then it'll extract the data from the receipt and then fill the transaction with all the details in the different fields. I'll pick expense type as, let's try something else, let's try transport as the expense type. I'll leave the date as is. I'll put the amount as 32.05, which is what it was. And then you'll notice that since we set defaults, right, these values, the merchant, payment method, cash, country, state, city, are all pre-filled. You can still change it if you want to. So we'll change the merchant. We'll say taxi. The payment method has cash. Amex is a corporate card. Since this was an out-of-pocket expense, I'll leave it as cash. And again, the nomenclature over here can be changed as well to your requirements. You can call it what you like when you set up the application. And I'll leave this country, state, city. In the comments, I'll say something like customer meeting for my manager. Save it. Click on upload all. Whoops. Click on upload all. And that's it. So if you're walking out of Starbucks with the receipt, in a few seconds your expense is done. That's really what I'm showing here. So we have one mobile expense uploaded as well. So we got 3 expenses, 3 different flavors. So let's go to the back button. Let's go back to the home page. We'll click on reports now. And let's create a new expense report. So I'll click on create report. I'll give this report a name. Something pertinent. Click on save. And in the report type, there's multiple report types that we can configure to your requirements. Right now, I'll just show you how corporate and project works. If I pick corporate, then it gives me a cash advance field because it's been configured to do that. You don't have to have that. You can even, same philosophy, you can name the report type like you like. You don't have to call it corporate. If I change the report type to project, then it gives me 2 different fields, customer and project number. And there's a list of customer numbers, which customer names that come from GP, and in the project number field is a list of project numbers, which again we can pull from GP. So for project accounting, if we need to tag expenses or expense reports with project numbers or project tasks, we can do that. I'll leave the report type as corporate. I'll pick a start date. Let's just go 1 month wide. I'll leave the cash advance empty. And then when I click on save, that creates a skeleton report to which now we can add those 3 transactions that we uploaded. For that, I'll click on the Add Existing Transactions that you see at the bottom right. So it shows me the single expense on the mobile tab. I'll tap on it, then click on Add. I'll click on the Add Existing Transactions again. Now when I jump to the mobile tab, there is your $25 corporate card expense. I'll tap on it, click Add. And finally, I'll jump to the Email tab, and there's your $40 that we sent via email. Tap on it, click on Add. So if I scroll down, you see all three expenses, three different flavors: email, mobile, and bank. Those are the three sources. The bank transaction, since it was paid with a corporate card, is red in color, the text. And it breaks it down as well. It tells you what the total is, what is not reimbursable, and then what the company owes the employee as reimbursable, which is $72. So now I'll click on Validate, the bottom left, just to make sure everything is good and all the data is attached, receipts, and so on. And then when everything is good, only then does it give me the Submit button. So I'll click on Submit, and that's it. My work is done as a traveler. What will happen now is an email will be sent to my manager that will have this confirmation number, which is GE1168, and it'll have some information about the report, the name of the person, the date range, and there'll be a URL in the email as well for the manager to click and take action on the report. From the traveler standpoint, my work is complete. So let's summarize what we've looked at. I'll come back to the PowerPoint. So the main objectives with the mobile app are to complete expenses along with receipts without having to get in front of a computer, right? And this includes a complete expense report as well. We make different expenses from different sources come together on one platform. So your corporate card, or if you have an email in your inbox, or if the receipt's in front of you, you can complete all those expenses with a few clicks. As you've probably seen, the mobile app is very simple, very intuitive, not very complex at all. And it's not just a blob of receipts. It's receipts attached to line item expenses with plenty of additional information. So there's a lot of detail in there. It's broken up by line item. Finally, the mobile app also works in an offline mode. So if you don't have connectivity, if you're sitting on the plane and you have 5 receipts in front of you, you don't have Wi-Fi, 3G, or any of that, you can still create the expense. You can take a picture, pick the expense type, and so on, and save it. You can't upload it. You'll need connectivity for that, but the majority of the work is done in the offline mode. So let's jump to the next piece, which is kind of rinsing and repeating this process on the web. One of the features that I did not show you in the mobile app is for mileage expenses, we integrate with Google Maps. That's available on the mobile device as well. But I'll show you that on the web where you can put a start, end address, and complete an expense using Google Maps for mileages. So we'll focus on the web application. We'll look at the approvals. We'll approve an expense report, and then we'll just briefly touch upon the Sunshine Act module. And that's available on the mobile device as well. You can tag expenses with NPI numbers. So I log into the web application, and once I log in, the key functions are available at the top. And then I have 2 core sections. One is the expenses, and the other one is the timesheet. For the timesheet product, we have a web-based timesheet application, but we have a planned release for a mobile timesheet app, which will be either Q2 or Q3 of this year. And during our webinar today, we'll just look at the web timesheet capture. So I'll start with the expenses. The expenses core section is broken up into 2 halves. One half is expense reports that I'm working on as a traveler, and then below that is expense reports submitted to me by my employees for approval. The philosophy with the web and the mobile is kind of the same, which is keeping it very simple, very easy to use for everybody involved with the process. All of these buttons expand into additional functions. And instead of going through every single one of them, let's just go ahead and create an expense report, submit it, and then take action as a manager. So I'll click on Create Expense Report. Give it a similar name, except I'll differentiate it by calling it Web. You see the same 4 report types over here as well. I'll take Corporate, Let's go from the 9th of March to 9th of April. I'll click on Save, and that creates a similar skeleton expense report. And to this expense report, you can add existing transactions. So these would be your line item expenses that you've uploaded from the mobile device or from the corporate card or from your email function. And just like we did on the mobile app, you would just pick the ones you want, click on Add, and it'll drop it into the report, and you send the report through. But we've already looked at that process on the mobile app, so let's try something different. Let's click on Add New Transaction. So this is the fourth source, the fourth box. If you remember the solution diagram, that's the web box. So any transaction that you create on a browser, on a laptop or a computer, will have the source as web. So I'll click on Add New Transaction. We'll pick airfare as one of the expense types, and then I'll pick a date, put in an amount. I'll browse, I'll select a receipt. I've got a few example receipts. You can attach JPEGs, PNGs, PDFs. You can also attach receipts with really strange names that come from scanning machines. Just like the mobile app, you can set defaults on the web as well. And I've got these default values set. I'll change the payment method on this from cash to Amex. Let's say this expense was paid to the corporate card. In the merchant field, once I start typing, it'll give me a list. You saw that. Pick Delta Airlines and click on Save. It's going to say, oops, I've got to enter comments because I've exceeded our policy of $1,000 for airfare. So I'll say last minute booking, and only then will it let me save the transaction. You can set up a separate policy, a different policy that mandates travelers to attach a receipt. So I've got one expense there. We'll come to some of the functions here in a minute. Let me create one more. I'll pick a mileage expense type. And you'll notice that once I pick the expense type as mileage, it pulls in the mileage rate from my user profile, which for this year is 0.575 per the IRS. Now I can enter the number of miles if I know what it is, or I can click on Calculate Mileage to use Google Maps to do the work for me. So I'll pick a start address, and then I'll pick an end address. Click on Save. It puts that value in, calculates it, does the math, and then puts the start and the end address in the comments field for reference purposes. So I will save that. So I've got a mileage expense done. Now let's look at the details at the transaction level. You can obviously delete an expense, you can edit an expense, you can copy an expense, especially useful for a hotel expense type where you might stay for 3 nights, so you create the transaction once, copy it 2 times, and just change the date on those. Everything else will be the same, the merchant, the receipt, and things like that. We also have a split expense feature. This is typically used when you pay for hotel with your corporate card. So let's say you spend $500 at Hilton. Many companies will require the travelers to break that $500 down into $300 for room, which will be a different expense type, $100 for meals, which again is a different expense type, and $100 for parking. So using the split function, you can split those. It'll still maintain fidelity of data because it will not let the user change the total amount and won't let the save of the split happen until the total has been used. You'll notice that the source over here is web. In the receipt box for the mileage expense, it just throws a snapshot of the blue squiggly line from Google Maps, and obviously for this expense which we attach to the receipt, it'll just show you the receipt in a clear fashion. You'll notice that there's a violation flag for this expense, which is what we did, right? We exceeded the policy of $1,000. And now I can validate this report and submit it for approval, just like we did on the mobile app. But before that, let me show you as per the Sunshine Act, in the cost center allocation feature, you can pick expenses and then you can allocate them. Firstly, you can allocate them to different business units or companies or cost accounting codes if you split expenses in that way. As an extension to that, I can pick different HCP numbers. So if I type in James, it'll give me a list of NPI numbers for doctors. that I can pick and associate to that particular expense or to multiple expenses in that list. So this is what is required per the Sunshine Act. And you can really filter it, to specific name, state. If you know the NPI number, you can do that too. But simply, you would just pick the one that applies, click on Select HCP, and that expense will be tagged with that HCP's details. So that's how that function works. Let's go ahead, in the interest of time, let's just validate this report. Everything looks good. Let's submit it. And now my manager will get an email, and then he or she can take action on this report. The first status is done. We've finished this step. It's now at this step, which is submitted to manager. So let's sign out from my account. I'll log in as my manager's account. And if I look down here, that's the expense report we just submitted. And then, of course, this is the report that we submitted from the mobile device. So I'll pick this one. And looking at this as a manager, I can do multiple things. And our manager approval workflow is we support multi-levels of approvals. And there's two different options in there. You can go approvals by a standard hierarchy where the expense report will go from manager 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 all the time if you have 4 levels. The second option is we can set amount thresholds for different levels. So level 1, let's say, is $1,000. Level 2 is $2,000. If an expense report exceeds 1,000, only then it will be sent to the next level. If it's below 1,000, then the first level manager becomes a final approving manager. In all of these formats, we recommend that accounting or AP be the final gatekeeper or the final manager before the data is pushed to GP. So that way, if they can make any, if something needs to be fixed or changes need to happen, they can do that. And I'll show you that in a second here. The first screen is I can approve or reject a report, and I can type in comments explaining the reason. If I, as a manager, am unavailable to look at this, then I can redirect the expense report to other managers in the system. The third option is I can edit the report as well. So this is what I was describing, which would be very useful for an accounting type manager, is you can make tweaks. You don't have the expense report sitting there waiting to be fixed by the traveler. If they're on to the next trip, it could be several weeks before they have time to do it. So for example, in this case, my accounting manager could say, hey, you know what, this really shouldn't have been the first, it should have been the third. So she can change the date, click on save, and she would validate this report to make sure everything is good. And when everything is valid, click on the back to review expense report page, and the change is done. So the report continues to move forward. It's not stalled. So this report looks good. It's got 2 expenses, $1,205 paid with corporate card and $262.14 paid out of pocket. So let's approve this report. GE1169, it's now manager approved. Which brings us to the next step, which is pushing this expense report to GP using our integration app. And we use web services or eConnect. In case you do multi-entity management using binary stream, we support that as well. We support integration of multiple GP versions, going all the way back to GP10, and the typical integration formats that we've seen are, the standard one is into payables, where we create an invoice to the respective vendor ID, or the other option is we can send the expense data to the project module within the project expense screen. If you track expenses by project number, or if you even bill back your clients. So we'll look at payables in this demo, and what I'll do is we have a report ready. So let me log into our GP server. And I'm just going to fire it up. I got GP 2013 here. So I'll just open up GP and set it aside. Oops. And let me open up the integration app. So this is our proprietary tool. I'll pick GP 2013. And this is logging in as an admin. So this is typically accessible to an admin type user who would be finance, accounting, AP, or IT, right? So once I sign into our integration app, I am going to export expenses from our system, from the web application to GP. The integration app does other things as well, as you probably noticed. And this page gives me a list of expense reports submitted by different employees at different times. All of them are manager approved. Only manager approved reports will show up here. The last one is the one that we just worked on. I'm simply going to select that report, pick the next status in the workflow, click on Update Selected, and grab a cup of coffee, and I come back, and the data will be in GP. From a process standpoint, you can think of this as you could have a list of expense reports at the end of the week, or end of 2 weeks, or end of the month, and you would just select all of them, click on this AP Approved status, and the data will be sent to GP automatically. You don't have to manually key this in. We also have an option of scheduling, like doing an automated scheduled export, where every Friday at 5 p.m. all manager-approved reports will be sent to GP without having to come to this screen and picking the next process and clicking on Update Selected. The reason many of our customers do this is because it gives accounting a little bit more control. If they kind of figure out at the last minute that something does need to be fixed, for some reason something was missed, then they don't have to go and fix that in GP. They can fix it in our application and push all the expenses when they're 100% sure that the data is good. So this is turned green, which is a good sign. Let's go into GP and let's go look at these transactions to see what GP has done. So I'll go to the Payables module, go to the Transactions entry, and let's look for 1169. All right, there it is. So we have a couple of invoices. The first invoice, it has the expense report number is thrown into the voucher number field. It's in a batch called Gorilla, and this was paid to the corporate card, so it's pulled in the vendor ID of the corporate card, and the amount is 1205, which is what, coming back to the report, which is what this is. So that's one invoice. If I go to the next, well, actually, let me open up the distributions as well. In the distributions page, we map the expense report number and the merchant information as well in the memo field. So the transactions all don't look the same in GP. If I go to the next invoice, in this case, it's an invoice made out to me because I had an out-of-pocket expense for mileage, which is the 262, and the distribution on this will say report number and mileage as the information in the memo field. And the following processes will be just the standard way you do it today. You would post this batch to post all of the expenses tied to it. If I go back to the integration app and I reload this page, then this expense report will disappear from the list because it's done. It's been sent through all the way. Similarly, if I come back to the web application, it still says manager approved. If I refresh this page, it'll now say AP approved. And we have a PDF preview feature where, and this is available at all stages of the expense report, to the traveler, to the manager, and to accounting. Is really a very useful tool where it generates a PDF of the expense report with all the details, and the subsequent pages include the receipt capture with the respective expense type and date. So it's a good backup tool. You can save this PDF, you can print this PDF. For the mileage expense type, it just throws that snapshot of the map that we saw. The only other thing on the web application is there's an audit trail feature. Again, this is available to all the users, and this provides a running summary of what's been going on with this expense report with a date and a timestamp for full visibility. So it shows when did I as an employee submit this report with a date and a timestamp, when did my manager approve it, when did admin approve it, and then at the transaction level it shows that my manager Tim changed this transaction, right, which is what we did. We changed the date on this from April 1st to April 3rd. So that's available as a history, and you can download different versions of this in different, for compliance or audit purposes. The only other thing I wanted to show is reporting, but I'll come back to that if we have a few minutes at the end. I'll just touch upon the timesheet product really quick. Again, extending the philosophy, right? It's the same thing, which is keeping it very simple, very easy to use. You can pick a specific range of week within the timesheets section. Once you pick that, you click on Add Row, and you can pick all the details at this line item level. Pick a customer name. You can pick a corresponding project that's tied to that customer. And you can have project subtasks. Maybe just have example tasks over here, but I can pick the respective mapped task number. The billing code has, if the status is billable or non-billable within the project module in GP, there's usually a billable flag. We can read that and set the status over here. And of course, you have the standard time versus the overtime time type, and then you start typing in the numbers. And it's just like an Excel sheet grid format, making it very simple to enter time information here. And you can access this on a browser or an iPad as well. It's not very difficult, not very tricky to use. And then once you complete the timesheet, you can save it, and it'll just go through the same process like we did with the expenses, which is you would validate this timesheet and then submit it. The manager would get an email to take action on this particular timesheet. From a user standpoint, you can also export this timesheet as a PDF. In the Export to Excel option, it'll give you an Excel of the timesheet. It's just a handy tool. And as you update fields or update numbers, it'll show you the updated values within this Excel sheet. Just wanted to breeze. Unfortunately, I had to breeze through that pretty quickly. I think we have another 5 minutes, so let's open up the floor to any questions. I'll skip a couple of slides here and just go to the Q&A page. So Jen, if you have any questions, we can take them right now, or we can look at some other specific features if somebody wants to see them, like the analytics or the reporting, things like that.
Thanks, CV. If you have questions, please make sure you type them into the question area. I did have one question come in, CV. Somebody was inquiring about compatibility with GP 2015.
And the answer is yes, we do work with 2015 as well. And it's the same two integration formats. We can send expense data to the payables module in GP 2015 or the project module as well. So the short answer is yes, we are compatible with GP 2015.
Thanks. We'll give people a couple minutes if they have questions. Sometimes it takes a little bit to type them in.
Sure.
Here's one. Do the users have to be employees?
And I assume the intent of this question, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you might have contractors or temporary users using the expense application. Is that the intent of the question? If you could clarify, that would be very helpful.
Yes, it is, correct.
Okay. In that case, they don't have to be employees. They can be set up to use the application as a contractor, and we'll use the role or work group concept so that only specific report types or expense types are available to them. And from a pricing standpoint, we have a couple of flexible pricing models which Crestwood can advise in more detail. You can talk to your sales rep at Crestwood, but you can buy either a bucket of expense reports or you can pay per user. Those are the two different pricing models. So if you have users who are just contractors, then you could go with a bucket of reports because they might be sporadic, or they might be here for 1 month and then gone the next month. So hope that answers your question and gives you a better understanding of the options.
Thank you, CV.
Sure.
I don't see any more questions coming in quite yet. We'll still give people a minute in case they're in the middle of typing.
Okay. One very common question we get asked is for people that bill back their clients
what options do we have in terms of supplying the supporting data, which is receipts and details. And the PDF preview that I showed, which generates a PDF of the expense report, we recommend using that, and we can change the logo on it. We can remove our logo and put the customer's logo on it so it looks like an internal document. So what our customers have done is they'll just slap an invoice page on top of that and send that as supporting documentation to their customers to bill them back. So we get that question very frequently on webinars. So just wanted to throw that out there if you're thinking about it.
One more question, CV. Are people able to manage time off accruals through Gorilla Expense, or would you need to manage that more in the payroll and GP?
That would be more within payroll. We probably need to discuss that requirement in a little bit more detail. We haven't seen it yet. So typically we can look at it, but I would think that falls within more of a payroll kind of a function.
Thanks, CV.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks for taking time to look at this with us. There's obviously a few more features and a few more functionalities that we can cover in more detail. Or if you have any specific questions, you can contact your sales rep at Crestwood, and they'll definitely get in touch with us. And hope you've enjoyed this information.
Thank you so much, CV, and thanks everyone for joining us.